What you're about to see and hear in the following video will show you Dr. Mike's level of ignorance, arrogance, lack of ethic and ability to present argumentation, and highly unprofessional behavior. It will also show you that Mike Israetel cannot represent science and should not be taken seriously anymore. So, long story short, there was an interview when Dr. Mike shed on Mike Mercer, insulting him,
trying to get into Mike Mercer bullshit,
and never presented a single argument. He just basically said a bunch of nonsense and felt into logical fallacy multiple times.
Who am I compared to Mike Mercer? Well, I'm bigger and stronger than Mike Mercer. That's it. Yeah. So all of a sudden, that changed the game.
So let's debunk this pseudo-argument, but before, I want to clarify that I'm not a delusional Mike Mercer fanboy or Mike Mercer fan in general. Matter of fact, I'm completely opposite of being a fan of Mike Mercer, and I'll tell you that 8 out of 10 times I would disagree with Mike Mercer. However, if you disagree with him, you want to attack the arguments. You don't want to attack a person who passed away and can't defend himself anymore. So let's start with the first pseudo-argument that Mike Israetel presented. He said basically, I am better, thus I know more, which is a classic representation of argument from authority and absolutely no-go in academia, and every scientist ought to know this. But even more than that, he said, I am stronger and I am bigger, which is, again, absolute nonsense. First of all, we're talking about who is stronger. It is actually not stated, because right now, at the moment, I really doubt that Mike Israetel is stronger than Mike Mercer. But even if you take peak strength level of Mike Israetel, which is 160 something kilos bench press for 8 reps and 5 plate squats for 8 reps, and compare with Mike Mercer, we see that Mike Mercer used to bench 170 kilos when he was just a teenager. But the problem is that his strength level in general is not stated, and we can't say how strong Mike Mercer really was. We can just assume, due to his training methods and the fact that he was a top-level bodybuilder, that he was probably kinda strong. And is Israetel stronger than Mike Mercer? I really doubt it, but again, it is not stated, and saying something like this is just absolutely ridiculous. But on top of all that, he said that he is bigger. And again, what you mean being bigger? You are definitely fatter, you definitely retain more water, you are definitely heavier. But on top of all that, you are shorter. So what do you mean by bigger? You meant more muscular. Again, how did you measure it? How did you know that Mike Mercer had less lean muscle mass? Again, is it just speculation? And even if we imagine that Mike Israetel indeed is stronger and bigger, it is absolutely has nothing to do with bodybuilding. Because in bodybuilding, what really matters, who has better physique. It's like saying Eddie Hall or Brian Shaw are better bodybuilders than Kevin Levroni because they're bigger and stronger. So you see, we just started the video, but Mike Israetel already said bunch of nonsense in just a couple of sentences. And the following thing that he said was even more terrible.
I'm more educated than Mike Mercer. I know more things than Mike Mercer. Yeah.
First of all, a well-educated person will not say that he is better educated, that he is smarter, that he knows more things than the others, because again, it's just argument from authority. But on top of all that, it's just some kind of insult, because he didn't just say he was more educated, but he said that he knew more things. How can you measure those things? How do you know that you know more things than Mike Mercer did? It is absolutely nonsensical. The following argument of Dr. Mike is a classic representation of modern superiority complex.
So when people are like, oh, what did Mike Mercer like? What was his diet like? I'm like, why the fuck do you want to know? Like, are you really interested in how a 1976 Ford Mustang works? Why? It's got shit gas economy, shit 0 to 60, shit everything. It fucking weighs a ton. It pollutes the fucking world around us. I want a Tesla, goddammit. I want the modern shit. I don't give a fuck what the fuck Mustang did in 1970.
First, why do you compare cars or technologies in general with humans that haven't changed for the last hundreds of thousands of years? Second, he basically said that Ford was less eco-friendly than Tesla. Which absolutely makes sense, of course, because you know electricity is produced just from the air. Also, you know that batteries in Tesla and in electric cars are very, very eco-friendly. Then, when we're talking about cars, there are lots of people who would prefer Ford over Tesla, and Tesla is not a perfect car, it has many flaws. Matter of fact, when we're talking about cars, price should be also considered, because I can compare 5 years old Mercedes-Benz S-Class with some new cheap car. By the way, you know that the first cars that were invented were not internal combustion engine cars, they were electric cars. Following Dr. Mike Israetel logic, or I would say lack of logic, under no circumstances we should return to usage of electric cars because they are the oldest ones. What about Buran, for instance? Are you interested in 1988 autopiloted spaceship that was running on 20th century CPUs? How did it work? It is absolutely brilliant. It's a pinnacle of human technologies, it's a pinnacle of space technologies, and we can't get close to that level. It is truly marvelous. So Dr. Mike, in this argument and throughout the interview, showed us modern superiority complex. What is it? Nowadays there are lots of people who think that people in the past were ignorant and dumb, but in reality it's not the case. And if you know things at all about history, you know that all those medieval or ancient people were dumb were just myths. But we'll talk about later in my dedicated video on modern versus old school training. So people didn't have access to technology that we do, but they were as intelligent and as smart as we are right now. And if you say something like modern is better because it's modern, it doesn't make any sense, because modern states for being modern. It doesn't mean that it's better, it doesn't mean that it's worse either. And to show why it is better, you actually want to represent some arguments. Matter of fact, there are lots of things that were better in the past, like art or some professions. For instance, you can compare old composers like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Yotan, etc. with modern composers. So people in the past knew how to do some things better because it's a matter of skill. It's bodybuilding, it's not science, it's about skill. And this is why all the top level bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen, or sport athletes in general are not scientists.
Yeah. Like, it's like if someone sent you, like back in your football days, someone sent you, like, the warm-up routine of the 1958 football team. You'd be like, okay, why? Yeah.
So again, he's just full of modern superiority complex, and he compare old football routine versus modern one. How's this? What about Olympic weightlifting? I just made a video on this. You know that all the records in Olympic weightlifting, except Lasha's records, are from the 20th century. And they are unbeaten by a huge margin still. How about this? Why didn't you mention it? And there are lots of track and field records, for instance, that's still untouchable.
But if there's bodybuilding pros training and Arnold comes in, he's like, hey, how are you guys doing? Let me work in. Yeah, they're not gonna really be like, he's like, tried this, it's helped me in the 1960s. We're gonna be like, yeah, but I'm 10 times your size. Like, you know, like...
Comparing Arnold with modern bodybuilders doesn't make any sense, because old bodybuilders from the 80s, from the 70s didn't have access to somatotropin and insulin. So you can compare them, but you can compare modern bodybuilders with 2000s or the 90s era bodybuilders. And you see that modern bodybuilders are not better. Matter of fact, they're less conditioned, they're less muscular than old school bodybuilders. How is it possible if modern is better? Shouldn't be modern bodybuilders be way bigger than Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler or Kevin Levroni or Marcus Rule or Dorian Yates? No. They are neither as conditioned as those school bodybuilders, nor as muscular. Why didn't you mention this example, for instance?
Mike Mentzer's advice on diet. What? Motherfucker was around in 1982. I don't give a fuck what someone from 1982 said about diet. I'm sorry.
And we're talking about diet. Okay, how's this? Obesity rates in the 70s in the United States of America, 15%. Nowadays, it's close to 45%. Consider the fact that some of the people who were considered as obese people in the 70s are not considered as obese people in modern medicine. Of course, it's not just about diet, but physical activity and lifestyle in general. But anyway, diet plays a huge role.
It'll go away after a year or two, and it'll come back. And it's true. Ever since then, I count every 5 years or so, core training comes back. Have you seen some variation of the low-carb diet rear its fucking head?
So he's just popping it out all the time. All the time.
That's it.
What's more confusing that he's saying that training is cyclical, which by the logic that he uses can be the thing, because if we know better than previous generations, under no circumstances we want to return to something that was considered right back in the days.
It's like asking, this is going to offend some people, what do you think about alternative medicine? Well, anything that works in alternative medicine is just called medicine, and that's what you do. So I don't think much about it at all. So with the Mike Mentzer thing, because it's a fad.
For some reason, he mentions alternative medicine, which absolutely has nothing to do with bodybuilding and Mike Mentzer type of training. But if you're talking about alternative versus official medicine, there are two types of official medicine, which is amp care and surgical medicine. And if you break your leg or something, surgical medicine will help you. Not in 100% cases, but there is a high chance. However, if you have some chronic issues, like for instance me, I have an eczema, it cannot be cured by modern medicine. This is why people refer to alternative medicine, which are basically some remedies which are not considered to be proven that they can be used in official medicine, but they can help. Matter of fact, most of the drugs that being used in modern medicine are just basically some essence, and they are based on some natural ingredients, some plants that people have been used for ages, for thousands of years.
Of the bodybuilding process that was compelling and evidence-based, or even just based on heuristics that made sense.
Evidence-based doesn't exist in modern sports because there are just few studies that can be considered as a credible source of information from a scientific standpoint of view on bodybuilding. And those studies are on some minor nuances. Science doesn't answer how hard you should train, whether you should train full body or splits, whether you should use machines or free weights, whether you should do isolation or basic power movements, how frequent you should train, and so on. Because there are whether no studies in those areas, or some studies that show you that basically it doesn't matter at all. And that's it. And why do people use this scheme, science-based lifting? Because they want to look better. But in reality, science doesn't know how to train. Science doesn't even know how our muscles are being built. And people usually refer to science as some kind of almighty deity or something. But in reality, science are just people and their knowledge. And we are restricted with our knowledge. And again, why you talk about science so much if it's about bodybuilding? It's about building your body. It's not about how many studies you have read. It's about how good your training is, how good your diet is, and so on. So let's compare then Dr. Mike Israetel physique versus Mike Mercer physique. I think I don't have to comment on this because it's clearly that Mike Mercer is just on another level. Whilst Mike Israetel didn't win a single bodybuilding competition despite the fact that he tried to do it for dozens of years and he's injecting steroids over those years. And the interesting thing is that they tell you that he's using less steroids than everybody else, but in reality we see that his head and stomach size and other signs show us that he's actually abusing steroids. He used this argument that steroids give him anxiety, but he gave up competing. And now I'm gonna ask you a question. What the hell? Didn't you stop using steroids if you don't compete anymore? If they are so bad for you? You know why? You know the answer. Guys, and we should talk about genetics a little bit, because many people say that Mike Israetel just doesn't have a good genetics. Okay, if you use this argument, you gotta be consistent. And if you say I'm bigger and stronger than him, but I look worse because I have worse genetics, doesn't make any sense. You either use this genetic excuse in both arguments, or you don't use this excuse at all. So you can see that Israetel cannot compare with Mike Mercer. Matter of fact, a comparison like this shouldn't even exist because Mike Israetel represents just a local mediocre bodybuilder physique. Guys, I live in a shithole, and I've seen people in my local gyms who have physique even better than Mike Israetel. We got guys like Juji Mufu, for instance, who's not bragging about how good he trains. He competed just twice, and he already did it way better than Mike Israetel with his superior training over the decade. So from a bodybuilding perspective, Mike Israetel here and Mike Mercer's here. You cannot compare them. I used to do martial arts for 7 years, guys. And imagine comparing me with Evander Holyfield or Fyodor Emelianenko or Mirko Krokop. Doesn't make sense. Now let's talk about scientific standpoint of view. Mike Israetel holds a PhD title. But you know what his PhD stands for? Have you wondered? Okay, be ready. His PhD stands for people with more muscles and less fat can jump higher and run faster. That's it. I don't think it's a PhD level, guys. It's absolutely childish. What's the next obvious thing you want to prove? And if we're talking about science in general, how can science benefit from Mike Israetel's existence? If he never existed, science would notice it. But on the other hand, you got Mike Mercer, who was a kind of pioneer, and I think science somehow benefited from his existence. And if we're talking about scientists in general, why there are so many scientists who act superior, especially towards previous generations, but in reality, they didn't invent anything and didn't do anything that science or society can benefit from. When I imagine a scientist, for instance, I don't imagine Mike Israetel. I will imagine Galileo Galilei, freaking Tesla, Karolov, or people like this who really did something beneficial to science. And there are so many scientists throughout human history that didn't hold a PhD title. Because guys, holding a title and actually know something are very different things, especially when we're talking about sports. So in a conclusion, we got a scientist with 15 years old dated PhD on absolutely childish topic, who instead of attacking the arguments, attacked the opponent, insulting him, fall into logical fallacy multiple times, operates with argument from authority, has modern superiority complex, absolutely unprofessional, a lack of ethic, insulting and using allegories instead of argumentation. And it was the most important, being arrogant. I don't think he represents PhD level or academia level in general, and calling him Dr. Mike is too much of a credit for him. I'm highly disappointed with this mediocre bodybuilder with huge stomach and huge ego who's been abusing steroids over a decade but can't win anything. But I'm genuinely concerned about his health. Look at his head and his gut. It seems like they're about to explode. That's it. Ciao.
Just because you trended doesn't mean you said some right shit, you know?